You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network. This is the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of Thunderquack Podcast Network, where anything can happen. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your butts. It's Thunderquack time!
Hello and welcome back to the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of Thunderquack.com, which you can get early every Tuesday over at patreon.com/Thunderquack, just like our Patreon producers Brian Murawski and JJ Samuel do. Or you can wait and get it late every Friday on podcast services across the galaxy. I am one of your hosts, Michael Cohen.
And I'm your other host, Amanda Conkin.
You know what? This is amazing. The sporting event that shall not be named, because it like Voldemort, it's like we're not allowed to say it anymore.
Yeah.
I guess you're only allowed to say the big game, because if you say the actual thing, then you have to pay a corporation a bunch of money because they own it, and it's like, but if they're saying it, it's to promote your thing. It's like, yeah, but we want money, and it's like, but that's how you're gonna get money. But they don't understand it. In any case, it's dumb because they also think that kneeling is unpatriotic. So, it's the whole thing. That's not what we're gonna talk about this week. Normally the episode after that, we would have all sorts of new stuff to talk about.
Oh yeah, because of trailers and stuff. Yeah,
there were two things that I know of. I haven't seen anything. I don't even think that there were any commercials or anything worth talking about. But there's a Falcon and the Winter Soldier trailer that dropped, and there's a 30-second TV spot for Raya the Last Dragon that has a little bit of new footage. But both of those things happen next month, and I could care less about discussing them because we know that they're going to be good. So
the one thing that I have heard that I haven't looked into was that Timothy Chalamet was Edward Scissorhands' son in a Super Bowl ad.
That is literally the only commercial that I have seen called out anywhere by anyone.
Yeah,
and I think it's because there's a marketing campaign to promote the commercial.
Oh, interesting.
There's also like the and this is a little bit more of a controversial one, is that like Uber Eats had a commercial where they paid Mike Myers and Dana Carvey to reprise their roles as Wayne and Garth.
Nice.
And I can't remember who the other person is that they brought into it, but there's some famous person. And people are like, yeah, so they spent however many millions of dollars for this TV spot, because that's how much it costs just to get the TV spot, just to get the airspace, airtime to put your commercial on in the first place. And then on top of that, they got to pay Mike Myers to do a thing, which doesn't come cheap. Dana Carvey is probably he'll do it for the free pizza on set, but it's not got a lot going on. But in any case, Uber Eats spent all of this money to make a commercial to tell everybody to support local restaurants during the pandemic. Meanwhile, they're killing local restaurants by taking 30% of their profit on every transaction. So that's my way of saying, don't use, look, I'm all for it. Use Uber Eats, use Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, use those things, because the delivery people, I should say, they absolutely are working for their tips and stuff. If you can, maybe tip them in cash. I don't know, that's weird because we don't have cash in this house ever. But just because I think if it goes in through the app, then the company is probably taking a portion of that tip or something. But it becomes a weird thing, I'm sure. But I don't use those apps to support local business. That might sound weird, But here's the thing. Just call the restaurant. Just call them and they will take your order, and then just get in your motor vehicle, put on a mask, and then go to the place and then get your food and bring it home to you. Now, that might be a little bit uh, I don't know what's the word.
Reductive?
Privileged of me to say, because like not everybody has
You can do that.
a car that can go do that. But I'm saying if you have the ability to do this, then do this, because a lot of restaurants will actually like give you a discount right now if you place an order directly with them, because they're like, well, we'll give you 10% off, because then we're still making more money than if you order through Skip the Dishes or Uber or whatever, right?
There's something, as somebody who just ordered from Skip the Dishes last night, I guess BC has some sort of thing where they've put a cap on how much these companies can charge.
I think it's 15% in BC.
So now they're charging me directly an extra $1 for my order.
That, and I honestly, that's the way that it should work. They shouldn't be charging the restaurants. The restaurants should the restaurants are a service provider that these services are making money off of the backs of.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be charging the restaurants at all.
It's my choice to sit on my butt and not go get it myself. And I decided that it was worth an extra $1, so I did.
Exactly. Yeah. If I'm gonna do it, then I'll pay the $5, right? Put it into the delivery fee. But also the stupid hidden fee of like, it's like, oh, it's $2.50 for a delivery right now from this restaurant. And then you get in and you're like, okay, I did the math. Why is it an extra $5? Oh, there's a $5 service fee on this one as well. And it's like, well, just put that in the delivery fee up front so that I know how much money I'm spending.
Yeah.
And you don't like blindside me at the end. But the majority of people, I think, don't pay attention to that for one reason or another. And so it obviously works for them. And as we've talked about before, corporations going to corp. You can't stop them. They're going to do the easiest thing to make the most money. Yeah. They're not going to be responsible about it unless you regulate it. But as I was saying, like, go ahead, use DoorDash, use Uber Eats, whatever. Use it to order from like McDonald's or KFC or Taco Bell or whatever, right? Like use it, like the corporations that can handle that, because their profit margins are so high, because they work on an economy of scale where like they're paying like a penny per hamburger that they're sending out, right? Like that's fine. McDonald's will be okay. But the small mom and pop like local restaurants, support them by actually getting off your butt and going to them, because that's the actual good food. Like that's like if we don't support those, then all we'll be left with, it's like in the movie Demolition Man. Have you ever seen Demolition Man?
No.
Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, Sandra Bullock. You have probably avoided it because on the surface it looks like an action movie, and I know you like action movies, but like it looks like a sort of dumb 90s action movie. But it is actually a pretty hilarious comedy action movie. And I think that you would actually really
I think
like
that's why I've stayed away from it, though. It's not just like
really?
It's not just, it's like parody-esque is what I get the sense from that one. And that's what bothers me
not
about
quite
that.
It's just the future is ridiculous, and maybe one of the things that's ridiculous about the future, if it's parodying anything, I think it's parodying Back to the Future 2, where we go to the future at the beginning of the movie for 15 minutes and it's like, oh, look at all this crazy stuff, it's so cool. And then in Demolition Man, he gets frozen, he ends up in the future and finds out that all restaurants are now Taco Bell because of the fast food wars of the late 90s. And Taco Bell won the fast food wars, so now all restaurants are Taco Bell. Fun fact, in Europe they don't have Taco Bell, or at least they didn't in the 90s. Maybe they do now, but at the time they didn't have Taco Bell. So they literally shot every reference to Taco Bell twice, and like they shot one version with Taco Bell and a version with Pizza Hut.
Huh.
And there's a European Pizza Hut cut of Demolition Man that is the same movie. It doesn't affect the plot, but they thought like, oh, this isn't going to play for overseas audiences that don't have Taco Bell.
So funny.
And so they made 2 versions of the movie, which
I
is
love it.
just the most absurd 90s thing I've ever heard in my life. Because it's like, because there are a lot of scenes where there are like neon signs for Taco Bell and stuff. Like there's like they go to an actual Taco Bell sort of thing. And they would have had to completely redo that set and make it a Pizza Hut instead.
Right.
And it's like, that's a lot of hours of work. Like that's a lot of set deck and like, anyways, Demolition Man is a great film and everybody should watch it. It's a lot of fun. All of that is just to simply say that there's nothing really to talk about in terms of news or anything like that, I don't think. So we're gonna just talk about a movie. We're just gonna talk about a movie,
which is so fun.
If you read the title of this episode before you listen to it, I don't know if people pay attention to the titles. I put a lot of time and effort.
I know you do.
Titles.
I pay attention to the titles because I'm always curious what you're going to title them. So,
this one's just going to be Space Sweepers Reviewed because that's all we're going to do. We're just going to talk about Space Sweepers, or as it was originally known, Spaceship Victory, which is a way better title. But that's the Korean title is Spaceship Victory. I don't know. Space Sweepers doesn't sound like something that I want to watch, but Spaceship Victory sounds much cooler and more like something that I want to watch.
I mean, you gotta wonder what's going on with that kind of rebranding, right? Where you're like, what focus group told you that?
This is the thing is that I think Netflix is targeting rightly, intelligently, a different audience than us. Because you and I are going to watch this.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We're going to watch it based on the content, not based on what it's called.
Right.
And we seek this sort of thing out. So when Netflix is showing stuff and it's coming soon, or we're on Twitter or Facebook or other social networks and stuff, and we see a clip or a GIF or something from something that looks like rad sci-fi that we've never seen before, we're going to actually dig and go like, what is this?
Yeah.
What's this thing that everybody's talking about? I'm going to watch this trailer, right? But who they need to grab with the title are the people who aren't going to do that. And so Space Sweepers probably tested well with those types of people, whoever those people are.
I will say they're
really not going to like the movie, but I mean, that's fine.
I'm so stoked. So for me to come to like how I wound up watching this movie is that like a month ago or a month or two ago, I was just looking through. Actually, no, maybe I got a targeted Netflix ad. Sometimes I'll look at the coming soon things and I'll actually like watch the trailers and my Netflix coming soon. Like when I'm on my phone, sometimes they'll show up. And I actually did see the trailer for this like a while ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is totally my jam. But also, Netflix knows me because they're the reason that I watch Korean dramas to begin with, because of Boys Over Flowers being like a targeted thing to me like years ago, and that like sending me on this path that I've never been able to fully recover from. But like the lead of this movie is from Descendants of the Sun, which is one of the most popular Korean dramas in existence. And it's so good and I love it so much. But anyway, so Netflix sort of knows that I'm probably going to watch this kind of a show anyways. But I forgot about it. And then the reason I watched is I was like, oh yay, I'm so excited. When this comes, I'm going to watch it. But then it's because Greg posted about it on his Facebook and was like, hey, Space Sweepers, like watch Space Sweepers. And I was like, oh man, Netflix, why didn't you remind me today that this came out? I was actually like, kind of upset that I had been on Netflix earlier in the day and Netflix did not recommend this as one of the things that I should be watching. And I was a little bit like shocked from it. But it does sort of prove that point that like, yes, I've found out about it through other people that were posting on their own pages. Yeah. So, it all makes sense again. Were you also getting that where there was like multiple people that that were like posting about it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, like I'm going to say that I think the first person who talked about this that I know of was you. I think that you might have shared this or sent it to me or something of that sort. And you've talked about it. I think you may even have talked about it on the podcast before.
Oh, potentially, where I was like, hey, there's this cool rad thing coming out that's totally my jam.
That said, like since last year when I made all of the Raylos upset and then became friends with a bunch of them, and then joined them on the Raylo side. I Many of them, like you, are into Korean dramas,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so as you can imagine, many of them, like you, are excited about this movie, and so a few of them, but in particular, two people who I trust very much on their opinions on sci-fi and fantasy. Marie Claire Gould, who hosts What the Force, and Ty Black, who does the Wit and Folly videos that I've recommended previously on the podcast. If people want to dig into like myth and Star Wars and stuff, her videos on YouTube are incredible. Wit and Folly, like go watch all of them
Nice.
now. They both uh, loved it, and along with many other people, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch this. And then last night you were like, hey, can you watch this movie so we can talk about it on the podcast? And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna watch it tonight. So
Which I never do. I'm so pleased that it was like it's like the first time that I've been like, hey, I have a topic for conversation tomorrow. Let's
yeah,
talk about it.
yeah,
So
yeah. So yeah, that's what I mean. Like it's one of those ones that I probably would have put on my list and then maybe gotten around to eventually at some point.
right, yeah.
But because there were so many people saying like, gotta watch it, you gotta watch it, you gotta watch it, um I went out of my way. So yeah, it's I don't know. Give me your review first. I want to hear what you thought of it first.
Okay. I mean, I was so unexpectedly fun. Like, the best surprise for me was that it wasn't a Korean movie. It was like a multi-ethnic movie, which I thought was kind of cool that I mean, it is. I mean, like the leads are Korean, but the
Yeah,
thing that was unexpected for me is that I thought it was a Korean movie. I didn't know that it was a movie starring Koreans but with a bunch of other languages featured in the film. And so that was like
yeah,
really weird to me, like because in the opening scene he approaches a woman who speaks English, and I'm kind of like, wait, what is happening? And then everybody like winds up being like multiple languages throughout, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what a fun sci-fi depiction. Because for me, that's the stuff that makes sci-fi great, is when you're like, if this is a futuristic Earth, like what are the things that would slightly change? And universal translators is one of those things, right? If you
yeah,
have a universe that exists with technology to such a scope that they can build cities in the sky, then of course you're going to have universal translators, and everybody can maintain their own sort of culture and language. And I just thought that that was really cool. So for me, like right off the bat, I was expecting a neat Korean science fiction. And I don't watch a lot, in terms of Korean dramas. I'm sure that they exist, but they're not really like, that's not a genre that like it doesn't exist, right? Like Korean dramas in space is not something that
yeah,
I have watched before. So I was really looking forward to this being like a, because my favorite stuff is like, science fiction in space, and then it being mixed with a Korean drama. But the beautiful part about this is that it's not actually a Korean drama. It's a movie, and it doesn't have the same romantic tropes as a Korean drama. So that is really like a misnomer when you're thinking like from a descriptive point of view. For me,
yeah,
this just happened to be a fun sci-fi film starring Korean people, which was unexpected to me and so exciting. Like that, like you can get in, like the moment you get into it and you meet that crew. And actually I will say that part of this was colored by how Greg mentioned it on his Facebook page, where he was like, hey, anybody that's missing the Firefly-esque, I feel like it was Greg, I'm pretty sure it was Greg, anyways, that is missing like the Firefly-esque like feeling of a ship crew, check this out. And so I hadn't thought that way about this before I went into it, but then the moment that he said that, I was like, oh, what an interesting way to describe something that I thought was a Korean drama in space. But then having that sentence that he had said, Firefly, like a Firefly-esque movie, I caught on to it like within the first like 10 minutes. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a ragtag crew of space pirates. And to me, I'm like, that
yeah,
just set me up to transition my expectations in a really positive way, because that is what it is. It's a group of ragtag space people trying to make like their own way in the world. And
Yeah.
There was zero love interest, which I loved. I mean, aside from, Pierre, who sort of like likes the captain, but like it wasn't in any way like
Yeah,
that.
there's a
Like
comedic
there's a comedic
character who
element
is
to
in
it,
love with someone, but yeah,
but it
there's no
wasn't at
romance.
all. It was about this group of people, like watching out for each other and forming this sort of family. And I just thought that like that is so fun. And I will say, I bawled my eyes out because I didn't get the turn. Like I didn't like the like last thing that was happening. I kind of like just let myself sit back because they set it up. Is this a spoiler cast or is this just a review? I can try.
We'll
I won't.
say
I won't.
save spoilers for
I'll
a
save
little bit.
spoilers for
Well,
the
like,
end. So
yeah,
there's no spoilers now, but it's like going into it, I was like really invested in, like, they set up the characters in such a way that I believed that they had certain things in mind and that's what they cared about. And at the end of the day, I'm like, oh no, of course that's what happened. Of course. And it was really, it was good. Like, honestly, there's like a moment in, I'm gonna cry just like thinking about it, where yeah, like, anyways, I just, I don't know.
we'll get
I
into
had
the
such a fun,
spoiler
but
part of it. Yeah.
I had such a fun time watching that. And for me, the last time that a movie hit me like that, and again, I think it's because I psych myself up to, I'm like, I'm going to sit and I'm going to watch the science fiction movie. The other movie I had a reaction in the same way was Interstellar. And that was a movie that I had very specifically been like, this is going to be a science fiction movie. I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to get my dinner and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch it. And then I just like was so engrossed in it that I remember just like bawling while watching Interstellar. I couldn't tell you for the life of me. It's not a memorable movie. I can't remember what upset me in Interstellar, but I do just remember that visceral, like, fun science fiction film that made me feel something. And I got that exact same thing out of this movie. And that's exactly what I wanted out of it. Like, I just wanted to enjoy the heck out of it. And that's exactly what happened. And so I'm so excited to talk to you about it. And I want to know, because you'll probably have more like detailed, nuanced things to talk about. Whereas me, I'm just kind of like, I just wanted to enjoy myself. So
Totally.
yeah.
I'll just start this off by saying, unpopular opinion time. I hate Interstellar.
Yeah, I know a lot of people hate Interstellar.
I think that is an awful movie. I don't think that Christopher Nolan's made a good movie in a while. I think that I think he's drinking his own Kool-Aid a little bit too much, and he's like the difference between Christopher Nolan and M. Night Shyamalan is like a hair's width. Like it like there's like a thread between those two filmmakers.
Yeah.
And look, don't get me wrong, Christopher Nolan makes much better films than M. Night Shyamalan for the most part. They make the exact same movies. The exact same movies. All of their movies are third act. Oh my god, right? And they all end with like a but is it right? Like it's just like it's all the same stupid nonsense. And J.J. Abrams does a lot of the same stuff with his mystery box garbage that I'm just so done with. I like there was a time and a place, and it was the early 2000s where that was a way to tell a story, and like that's not good enough anymore. Spectacle and uh and mystery boxes are not enough to make a story anymore. And I'm saying all of that and going off on that tangent because it's not a tangent.
Okay.
Space Sweepers is the opposite of that. It's
Nice.
the opposite. Everything that you need to know in this story is explained by the movie without exposition. I mean, like, there is exposition, obviously, because it is sci-fi. So there's
A little bit of,
it's actually there's a little tiny bit of a fantasy element to it, but it's mostly sort of pulp sci-fi adventure stuff. But everything is explained through storytelling and very little is explained through exposition. And even when there is exposition, like any good movie with a lot of exposition, we just watched Raiders of the Lost Ark last week with Kara for the first time, which some people are probably going to think I'm a horrible parent. But if you ask Kara, how do you feel about scary stuff? She literally said to me tonight, because I'm playing this video game Control, and it's a little bit like psychedelic horror component to it, And I was like, oh, like they got home. I'd been playing it before they got home, and I paused it. She was like, "What game are you playing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm playing that game that you're not allowed to watch me play, so I got to turn it off." And she's like, "Why can't I watch?" I'm like, "Because it's scary." And she's like, "It's okay, Dad. I can handle scary."
Aw.
I was like, in her
Aw.
little 4-year-old voice, 4.5-year-old voice. She wanted to watch Indiana Jones. She wanted to know what the whole thing was about, and I was like, "Listen, there's some stuff in this movie. It's gonna be scary."
I don't remember Raiders of the Lost Ark being scary. Maybe I don't remember
I
Raiders
mean,
of the
like
Lost
to a
Ark.
4.5-year-old, the tarantulas at the beginning, the snakes in the middle, the people's faces melting and exploding.
Oh, okay.
Uh, these are scary
Yeah, sure.
things to a child.
Yeah, that's true.
But to her credit, not scared. We watched Temple of Doom.
Wow.
Not scared.
Nice.
Not scared. She didn't like the bugs, which is the
That's
appropriate
fair.
response. That's the
good.
appropriate response.
Good job,
She
Kara.
gets it.
Yep.
She understands the point of a movie. But I Indiana Jones we were just watching, and it does the exact same thing with exposition, which is that like in Raiders there's a huge amount of exposition at the beginning of that movie after he comes back to the university, but it works so well because Harrison Ford is one of the greatest actors ever, full stop, end of sentence. And B, it all works to establish who that character is. We are learning about the Ark of the Covenant, but we're also learning about, oh, he's not just an adventurer. He doesn't just swing around on a whip. He doesn't just punch guys and shoot things. And like, he isn't just, bullwhip Mick shooty guy, right? Like like Indiana
Yeah.
Jones is a professor of archaeology, and that actually means something. He's Doctor in that one, just Dr. Jones. We don't get his full name until the third movie. But that's when we learned that his name is not actually Indiana. I because that's what they named the dog. And but it does all that, and same here. Like all of the exposition moments, or most of the exposition moments, are Sullivan's moments, the bad guy, Richard Armitage.
Yeah.
And they all work to establish what kind of a villain he is. And so it's fine. It's like, okay, we're going to spend a solid 3 minutes with him explaining about his plans for Mars. But it is all, and I love the way that they do it, because it's just this slow drip of like, here's a little bit of evil.
Yeah.
Right? He's like at first you're like, oh, he's like a Steve Jobs. And then you're like, oh, I guess maybe he's a little bit more like an Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And then they're like, no, he's really more of a Jeff Bezos. And then it's like, no, he's a space Hitler, actually. This is all about eugenics, actually. So
yeah.
like it is such a great like it's this thing of like, the second you meet him, you're like, well, clearly he's the villain. Right? So I don't feel like, even we're not in spoilers yet, I don't feel like I'm giving anything away.
No, he's clearly the villain.
From moment one, he's like all smiles and happy and whatever, and and then the reporter's like, I have some questions for you, and he's like all afraid to ask them. And it's like, so this guy is obviously, he wields a lot of power. He is the bad guy. If there are destitute people in this world, and he is talking about building a new world where everybody can be happy, but it's only for the rich people, yeah, that's your bad guy. That's your bad guy right there.
Yeah.
But that kind of ties into like the reason why I think this is a great movie, is that it actually has a purpose. It exists for a reason. This story isn't just, these characters are here and we want to get them to there and we're going to have some fun along the way. It is trying to express a lot about the ideas of the working poor, and the morality of the super rich, and and then also getting into some heady sci-fi stuff about, obviously, as I mentioned, eugenics, and the destruction of our planet because of our own actions, and all of that sort of stuff, which is really cool. But then this is the bow that wraps it all up. It's not about any of that.
Yeah.
It's really not.
Yeah.
As much as that is all so integral to the movie, what it's about is this family. And that is what makes it a great movie. That's what makes this something that I love instead of just kind of liking. And don't get me wrong, I have a lot of issues. There's a
Yeah,
lot,
yeah,
and Richard Armitage is at the top of that list.
yeah.
His performance pretty awful.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna say
okay,
that.
yeah, it wasn't the best.
Like
Yeah.
it's it in an American movie, it would be considered an awful performance. Because this is a Korean production, I think that there's a little bit more leeway for the American actor
Mhm.
to not deliver the best performance. And I would say that because like I think that there was probably um communication barriers and stuff like that. Like there were probably other challenges on that set that an actor like Richard Armitage I would have a harder time overcoming. A better actor, I think, could have
You know what?
pulled this off.
I'm I'm gonna
Are you hard pressed to think of what else he's been in?
no, I've been looking it up while I've been talking to you because I was like, oh, Richard Armitage. But I wanna jump on that because it's
Yeah,
been a thing that's a bee in my bonnet that I haven't investigated. But
yeah,
it's like a rule in Korean dramas that white people can't talk properly. Like they can't talk to like you can, like the performances are always really weird
weird and stilted.
for weird and stilted and like it's to the point where it has to be on purpose. Like there has to be something about the way it's being presented
Yep,
that is like
it's the way that they're
palatable.
being directed.
And so it's like
Absolutely.
it's something where I'm kind of like, oh, because it's way less in this. Obviously, like I wasn't as taken out of it. Like there was a lot of points where I was
It
like,
doesn't
this,
ruin the
like it
movie.
doesn't ruin the
Yeah,
movie, no. But like to the point where, but in Korean dramas, like it ruins it. Like any parts, the
yeah,
only people that get to speak regularly when they speak English are Korean actors who also are like fluent in English and you
yeah,
can just tell that it's because it's like a point of or pride or just something like there's it's like rare that you'll
yeah,
see people speaking in English in Korean dramas in a way that's not stilted or very intentionally and it probably has to do with like understand like comprehension and like how it feeds into the overall like aesthetic of the
yeah,
of the show. So I'm like I wonder how much of that is like an intentional like choice
yeah.
in this for his
It
character.
and I think all of it is tone and direction. Um, I think there are two sides to this.
Mhm.
On the one side, I actually kind of love it, even though it is an awful performance, because he absolutely plays an anime villain,
Oh,
right? Like
yeah. I
there
guess
are
so, yeah.
moments where if anybody who's watched Evangelion, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is a pretty well known anime, the bad guy is not a he is the bad guy, but he is also the leader of all of the good guys. But
Right.
Evangelion's a very complex show, to the point that it doesn't actually make any sense and is pretty stupid. But I that's there are reasons for that. That's a whole other episode. I but the director of Nerve, who is like the sort of the antagonist of the series, even though it's about fighting giant monsters from outer space. Um, he's really the antagonist, and he's the protagonist's father, and he has these moments. I'm sorry. I think that the printer has just started printing something.
Is that what that is?
Yeah,
That's
and I'm
aw.
wondering if it's actually gonna print or if it's just
Making
acting
sounds.
up. I'm probably about to get a text message from Crystal that's like, "Sorry, um,
That's
I'm
okay. I
actually gonna
couldn't
turn it
really
off."
it's all good. I couldn't really hear, so it's fine. So,
Uh, anyways, I there's this thing that he often does where he kind of turns his face down. Like he'll be looking and you can see his eyes, and then he'll turn his face down, and his glasses will um, like the glare will come over them so that
oh
they're
yeah.
just white,
Yeah.
right? And they do that in this movie a bunch. And there's one shot in particular when we kind of reveal finally, like not finally, but like with like a like sort of not beating around the bush anymore, that Sullivan is actually the villain, right?
Yeah.
That not
Yeah.
just that he is an antagonist, but that like he actually is going to start doing evil things. And it's this shot where like half of his face is in shadow and the other half of his face is lit, and he moves at one point, and the glare goes across his glasses in a very anime way, and I was like, oh, so this is all intentional. He is playing that character
Right.
archetype.
Right.
um and so it comes across a little bit stilted, I think, to an American audience, to a North American audience, because we are used to our villains being a little bit more nuanced. but
That makes sense.
but
Yeah.
that's not in Asian storytelling. It tends to be a little bit more arch, and that's just a style thing. Like that's just what that audience prefers. And it's I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of things don't translate over to to the Asian market. I honestly think it's one of the biggest reasons why Star Wars doesn't work in China, because in China your good guys are your good guys and your bad guys are your bad guys in a lot of stories. And um in Star Wars, it's it looks that way, but then the story often kind of flips it at a certain point. And I
Right.
think even, especially with the newer ones, like they don't really gel with Kylo Ren as much, except in The Last Jedi, where he is a more interesting character and much more like an Asian anti-hero than an actual villain, which is one of the reasons why that's all disjointed. But yeah, like I think that those sort of those disconnects of like there's more arch characters and stuff like that, as opposed to like more nuanced, which is what we tend to deal with, where it's like, oh, in an American story, in a North American story, we want the villain to be super relatable. There's
Right.
nothing relatable about Sullivan in this story, right? Like he is out of touch. That's one of the things that makes him a villain. So there is nothing relatable.
Right.
If you find yourself relating to him, it is only things that you don't like about yourself, right? Like,
That makes sense.
um,
Yeah.
and that works in a way, but is very different from what I think North American audiences are going to expect from a sci-fi movie. It's much more He's much more the type of villain that you would have expected in the 1980s, and this actually, a lot of this movie is very structurally 1980s, but then obviously made with very modern, very cutting edge effects. Man, the movie is beautiful. Like, it looks great.
Oh yeah. It's super
Not
clean.
just in terms of like technical execution, but like the art direction is fantastic. Like the color, the sort of like the energy that's in every frame is better than the majority of American productions. It is honestly what I wish Star Wars had more of.
It does
um
this
Go ahead.
beautiful sort of grimy, like the class divide, right? And like what technology does, where it's like
Hmm.
how do poor people, I was just talking about how I haven't watched it yet, but I just read The Expanse, like the novel.
Yeah.
And well, Leviathan Wakes or whatever. But and that it was in my head, I imagined what they were talking about, right? With their sort of like the gritty streets. And you get one scene, I think, in Rogue One, where he's in that, like, where Cassian is finding another guy, and then they have this stormtroopers, and he winds up shooting the guy and
Yeah.
running away. Like that sort of like grimy, like underground area of something, where it's like there's a certain population that lives here in these urban centers, and then everybody else lives in these beautiful spaceships in the sky. And I think that there was so much, like there was a great part of that was really well, like what you're talking about visually, like the aesthetics for that was really clear. And we don't spend a lot of time in the clean areas, but you can clearly, you see that they exist, and that's all you really need. Oh man, I'm just thinking now too about the expositional storytelling, and how this was one of the best introductions to the tone of the team that I'd seen. Like I was just like blown away by it, because the introduction to these characters is you meet him first, like the main guy on Earth, and you're like, oh, there's something there, some sort of history. He's looking for a dead little girl, and that's sad. But you don't really know what it is, but you can see that he's poor, and
Yeah.
he and like all this stuff, and you're like, oh, he's he's like hero-esque, and and then you go to the
He's got no shoes.
he's got no shoes, and you go to the sky, and there's these like a bunch of random space people doing something in space, which you find out later is grabbing the space junk, and they're all sort of like having a good time, and they're like, oh, this is easy because so and so aren't here yet, and they're like, wait, who is that? No, I thought that they weren't there. He was down on Earth the other. Like they do this like like where the way that people are talking about this the crew of Victory is so awesome, because then they just come through and they're like, we got this, and then they just like have this awesome like action sequence where they like pay off that they're like really these badass space sweepers, and I just love that, and I love that about sci-fi, like when you use action sequences
Yeah.
to tell character driven moments, like that this team is well known and people know them and they're really good, but then you get to it that they're still poor, they're fighting, they're like dealing with like, once you're poor you're always poor because you always have to like spend money to fix stuff or spend money, right? Like it just is sort of this beautiful, but it's just like a great way to show something really fun and flashy, but also at its core it's about, what is it about this team that you establish that they're well respected off the top, and that's important because it comes to fruition in the end. Like it's important that people know this team and that they respect them, and I think that that's really awesome. So I don't know. That's I sort of butt in about your aesthetic conversation to be about character moments, but like even just looking at the poster, like the colors of it, like.
But it does all kind of play into like everything works well together. I think that's one of the things, is that it isn't just about the aesthetic, it isn't just about the characters, it isn't just about the plot, but these elements all come together to be something bigger than the sum of its parts, right?
Right.
And I think that there will be a lot of parallels drawn to Star Wars, for obvious reasons. I mean, you can't really make a sci-fi fantasy adventure movie without people being like, well, how does this relate to Star Wars?
Right.
Especially right now. And I think I think one of the things that this movie does well is that like it doesn't shy away from the like the character components of it in the way that I feel like the last Star Wars movie did, where it's like they replaced characters with cartoons in Rise of Skywalker, right? Like Finn doesn't have an arc, Poe doesn't have an arc, Rey doesn't have an arc, Kylo doesn't have an arc. Like nobody really changes over the course of that story. Oh, don't get me wrong. All of a sudden, Kylo Ren goes from being Kylo Ren to being Ben Solo, and we're all very confused as to why. And Ben Solo is great, but like how he comes back is like, so I don't, what was it? Was it that he was stabbed? Was it that Leia gave her life to bring him back? Like it, and if you have that many questions, then the storytelling is not clear, because they didn't care about the storytelling. They just cared about getting you from sequence to sequence in that movie. This movie could be very similar, but it's not. I mean, like, I think that a lot of people are probably going to come away from it going like, wow, the middle of it kind of drags a little bit. And if you're not familiar with Asian storytelling, then I think that that's how you're going to feel about it. But if you watch anime, if you watch Japanese, Chinese, Korean movies, you're going to know that like actually like the second act tends to be way more character focused, which is true of most storytelling. But American filmmaking has gotten to this point of like, no, we gotta move.
Yeah.
Everything has to be Fast and the Furious. And don't get me wrong, I love the Fast and the Furious, right?
Yeah.
Those movies are great. Mission Impossible movies are great. Not every movie needs to be that though, right?
Yeah.
Like not every movie is about getting us from one sequence to the next sequence. Sometimes it's about a little girl drawing cartoons, right? And getting to know and falling in love with each of the characters in this crew. Because if we don't do that, we never fall in love with what's the little girl's name?
Dorothy or
Dorothy. Yeah,
Cotnam. Cotnam
yeah, Cutnam.
is yeah,
We never fall in love with her, so we don't care what happens to her,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And if we don't connect to her really quick
Mhm.
and then spend time with her, we never care about the rest of the crew
Yeah.
because the rest of the crew doesn't care about each other that much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Until this girl comes in and makes them takes them from being a crew to being a family,
Yeah.
right? And that's the journey of the story. We're gonna get into spoilers now, so if you do want to go watch the movie and don't want to be spoiled, I would say probably stop now, go watch it, come back and listen to the rest of this later.
And I
Because
recommend
now,
it. Go watch it. It's good.
oh
It's
yeah,
fun.
definitely go watch it.
It's fun.
Because we can't really talk about that transformation without talking about where it ends up, right?
Right. Yeah.
And specifically talking about Taiho, who the main character,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Who when we meet him, we think he's uh uh just this uh sort of scummy trash collector, right? That's
Yeah.
just doing whatever he can to make money. And then we learn about his origin story, and we don't the thing one of the things that I love is that we don't get this all at once. We get it in pieces.
Yeah.
Um and then eventually by the end of the movie we have the whole picture. I Where like at first we just kind of figure out like, okay, he's looking for this little girl. Why is he looking for this little girl? And then we learn that, oh, it's his daughter kind of, but it's this girl that he adopted because he murdered her family
Her family. Yeah.
at the behest of UTS, right? At
Mhm.
this corporation, because he was one of their soldiers. And then at a certain point in the story, it's revealed he wasn't just one of their soldiers. He was like the first one.
Yeah.
Like
Like the
he was their first like ace pilot super soldier. He's basically their Captain America. Like he was bad guy Captain America, and they made him do this stuff, and he was like, he basically grew a heart, and then
and they do it like they do it
turned his back on it.
in this beautiful way where there's never any um it's never ambiguous if the corporation is a bad guy. And
Yeah,
that's sort of this beauty that they don't try to make him, "Oh, I didn't understand what they were." Like they when they go in, like when he's killing the woman, right? It's like the indoctrination. Like they do talk about the indoctrination, right? And that
yeah,
how he was like young and didn't have family and he went into this. But it's like they knew what they were doing. They were killing like families. And it took this little girl to change who he was, but he stayed in it for a couple more years. And granted, like he couldn't kill people in the same way, but it's like this beautiful sort of cut and dry, like this corporation is a terrible corporation. And there's
yeah,
no, and that like leads to Sullivan being again what you're talking about, like that sort of like very much this is the bad guy. Like this is what this story is about,
yeah,
which is great. And I love it so much that it's not his biological daughter, because it again, what a great way to remove the love interest element, right? It's not that,
yeah.
oh, his wife died and he had to raise his daughter, right? It's what a beautiful way to get around that, right? That he found this it's like a sort of like completely changing the refrigerator girl narrative, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like it wasn't even it wasn't even anybody that he cared about, but he came to care about them because it reflected
It
upon his own
it
like
it it's a it does what Rise of Skywalker tries to do over 3 movies in one movie.
right.
And it does
Yeah.
it by introducing us to the villain who becomes a hero as the hero.
Right,
Right?
right.
He's
Yeah.
he's not quite a hero, right? He's sort of in that Han Solo space.
Yeah.
But we're introduced to him in this place where it's like, well, he's already left that world behind. He's already decided that he doesn't want to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
We don't know that yet, but then like we learn it, and it's only because we learn that we can then understand his decision to actually be a hero and
And
not just be out for his own self-interest, or I mean not really his own self-interest, but
Well,
in a
but
sort of selfish way, trying to recover his daughter, right? Like
but
it's
that's the thing too. They give you they give him an opportunity where I thought he had changed enough by the halfway point in the movie, or the
mhm,
I guess it's like three quarters, right? Where they're confronted and Sullivan breaks onto the ship and
yeah,
kills everybody, and it's
right
just
after they've sold the tomatoes,
right, yeah,
right?
right,
Which
right,
is
and
sort of the moment where you go like, oh, he does love this
he
little
like
girl.
cares, like he's a
Yeah,
different person. In that moment, he gets offered the money, and you're like, no, he's a better person. He's not going to take it, and you're like, oh no, he still takes it. Like it's like he hasn't quite his growth hasn't progressed, right? Like he still
yeah,
is the same character that you saw at the beginning of the movie. And he's very reluctant to come out of that because it's been such an identity for him for so long that all he wanted was this money to achieve this goal, that he didn't care who he was, right? And then it's when he reads the book from his daughter where he's like, "Oh, no, that's not what matters. It matters like what I actually am. It's not just what I do, right? It's not like this trajectory that I've been on. I have the ability to be good for things other than this girl I saved." Because I think there was so much that it wasn't just about her, like his daughter as like a person he had to protect. It was like like he imbued with her with like choices that he was making to try to become a better person, and he never actually had to be a better person. Like he was gambling and he didn't pay attention to her, and like that's the reason why she died, right? Is that he didn't
yeah.
actually, right? Like he wasn't a good person. He had somebody that he was taking care of that made him feel like a good, like he was making different choices, but he didn't actually become a good person. And that really is, I think, the beauty of that arc, is like letting him sit in that for a while and him having to realize that on his own, and that there's nobody else that gets him there, right? So
I think there's also an element of it that the the system that they live in, this society that they live in, bends and breaks people,
well,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And so it it made him do things that he wasn't proud of and that he could no longer do. So he stops killing for the company, right? So they fire him. So then he has no money, and because he has no money, he has to become this desperate person who's gambling and whatever to try and
yeah,
make money for them to survive. Because it's one of those situations where like you couldn't even work if you wanted to, really, right? Like as we see, even though they work, they're still, the more they work the more money they owe. Like they just pay off debts to pay off debts. um and so I think that at a certain point he realizes that if he's really going to, because I think like he looks at it and if I, it's a little bit confusing. This is the only place where, and maybe I just missed something, but like if they recovered her body in time before it left orbit, they could bring her back to life, or he could just bury her properly. Like I don't know what
yeah.
the motivation was entirely,
Yeah,
because it's like, well, how long has she been in orbit, like floating around in outer space? Like what is the technology here? like
yeah,
like I understand like they can track her down somehow, and if they do, then like then he gets her back. I don't, it wasn't super clear what the stakes were. I hate using that word now, but
no, but I know what
because
you
it's
mean.
just like so overused. But like it's just, it was a little bit unclear. It didn't matter though, because what mattered was that that was part of the system that
Yeah,
the corporation set up,
yeah,
right? Is that like they put people in these really dangerous environments, and uh these accidents are bound to happen, so much so that there's an economic system for recovering your lost ones,
yeah,
like for
yeah,
recovering lost family members, uh but only if you're a citizen. Otherwise you got to pay cash up front.
yeah,
And it's like, so the morality of this system is all messed up because they have the technology to save people. They
yeah,
have the technology to fix Earth.
yeah,
They have all of the means to do all of these things, but the super rich want to maintain the fact that they're super rich.
yeah,
And so like they're like, a lot of people I think are looking the other way at a lot of stuff, and then other more malicious people like Sullivan are taking advantage of that, right? And
yeah,
he decides that he's not going to be a part of that system anymore. Like to me, that's why that's ultimately the decision that he makes, is that the system that created the scenario with the two of them in the first place from the beginning all the way through to its conclusion is the problem.
Right.
And bringing her back isn't going to change that, and the money's not going to change that, right? Because he's still not going to be a citizen, and it's like they're still going to live in this unjust world, and everything's still going to be messed up and broken,
Yeah.
and Sullivan's going to do evil things with this little girl. And that's what he realizes, like, no, if I'm going to be the person that I wanted to be uh for my daughter, then I actually have to let her go, right?
Yeah.
And so he has to let go of that selfish thing and accept the situation, in order to then be willing to sacrifice everything, because the other heroes, Tiger Park, Uncle Tiger, and the captain,
Yeah.
Captain Jang, and Bubs, they all, when he says, like when he's got the money, they're all like, we don't want the money. Like, that
Yeah.
money is, like, the cost of that money is a little girl's life, right? Like, that's like, we're gonna go save Cottonham no matter what. We don't care, right? And we're probably gonna
And
die,
yeah, and
but
because
that's
they have a
better than
different sense of
living.
morality than him for sure,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
that's part of it as well. Like the
Um,
where they came from is different.
and he comes around to that, and then he comes
Yeah.
back, and does it? I think he dumps the money into the thing for them to
Yeah,
bring up
which
his
I'm like,
fuel.
why? That just seems no
Yeah,
what a
but
waste. But yeah.
um, but yeah, it's just it's his journey is obviously central to it, but I love that we're surrounded with these other characters. We have Bubs is a great character who's mostly there for comic relief, but ends up being this fantastic plant for I don't even know, like what kind of a story would you call this? Like, it is definitely an allegory for trans, uh
And so here's so
like go
there's
ahead.
an I actually did. I'm glad that you're mentioning this. So it's the character of Bubs, who I think was not once did I hear in Korean this robot called Bubs. I know that that's not the Korean name. Like, it really bothers me. I want to know I'm trying to look it up
Mm,
right now, like what the translation is. It's obviously something that is like a like a nickname or not. It's not like a real thing that the robot's being called, but that's besides the point. But well, it's voiced by a male character. And at one point during the movie, the robot is putting makeup on the little girl. And at that moment, the little girl calls the robot Uni, which is like a feminized term. And the translation is sis, which sure, that works. And I'm just wondering if you got that like the little girl called
oh
her
yeah, yeah, yeah,
sis.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Where it
it,
and
yeah, she sees Bubs for who she really
for who
is,
she is.
which
Yeah.
yeah, which was like, it's this fantastic moment where she's like, she blushes.
Yeah. Oh, it's
Bubs
so cute.
blush, because before that we default, obviously, a, because of the voice is
Yeah.
very masculine, and then B, because of
Mhm.
the construction of the robot looks very masculine, but I think also because we're just trained, robots are
Yeah, we're
boys,
trained.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
and so it's this great turn where she calls her sis, and then
Mhm.
all of a sudden you're like, oh cool, like, this there's more to this robot character than just this harpoon,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is awesome, but
Yeah,
like,
because she's like a sweet like killer robot basically that
yeah,
and yeah, it just it's
and
but
and
also the
where that story ends is just so perfect, and I love it
yeah.
so much. um
But I also love that too, like there is a certain amount that in your brain it allowed me to deconstruct science fiction tropes a little bit, because when you do see a
yeah,
robot, they're not gendered unless they have a female voice, and I find that really
yeah,
fascinating, right? Because like L3 gets gendered because of her voice, but
yeah,
like R2 is a guy for
yeah,
no other reason than my sexist stereotypes of R2 being a guy. Like, right? Like, it's like, so I love that it played with that, right? The idea that you have this robot that could be ungendered, right? Because robots tend to not, but that she wants to be gendered and therefore she is. And like talking about skin grafts, and I just think, yeah, it was a really cool, that robot story was really rad, especially because she was really badass as a robot.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
and you can kind of tell that that doesn't stop.
Yeah,
Like at
yeah,
the end of the movie when she's still sitting on top of the ship, and you're
yeah,
like, okay, so like this doesn't change anything.
yeah,
Her personality is still her personality.
yeah,
Yeah, I love it. And then we've got like the Captain Jang and Miss Uncle Tiger, Uncle Park, or
yeah.
what they call him, Mr. Park, and then the Cutnam calls him Uncle Tiger.
Uncle
Uh,
Tiger, yeah. Which
uh,
again, I think is there's probably some sort of honorific that went along with that was
yeah,
translated
yeah.
in an interesting
Well,
way. But
she kind of calls them all with these, yeah, like these sort of nicknames, um, like you said, like the honorific, and that's the thing is that like it's different language than English, very much so in the sense that like there are different rules that don't necessarily translate because we don't really treat um the way that we refer to people in the same way, because we tend to in
it's the most fascinating thing about Korean culture for me. Like for the brief
it's
parts that I've learned is just like how,
yeah, and it's actually it's very
yeah,
similar to Japanese as well, like and obviously the languages are very similar in a lot of ways, but I like the whole like the honorific elements is very similar to Japanese as well, where it's like you often don't even refer to somebody as their name, like you only, unless you're familiar with them, you generally use honorifics and stuff like that to to talk about somebody, like a teacher you would only call sensei, like you
right.
wouldn't be like, in the example of like let's say a famous sensei, Mr. Miyagi, right? Like the
Yeah.
fact that Daniel always calls him Mr. Miyagi, it's like in Japanese it's like you would just call him sensei even though you're very close.
Yeah.
You would call him sensei as a sign of respect. It's very similar, right? But I I just love how like towards the end of the movie, like the beginning of the third act, we get the reveals of the other characters' backstories. Um,
Right. Yeah.
like we learn about Captain Jang, who was like this special forces officer that like basically left to try and kill Sullivan. Like
Yeah.
that's her whole mission in life. And when he busts onto the ship and she's like, I'm just gonna, like she's like, finally, like I've got a chance, and she starts to activate the bomb in her mouth, and he pulls it out and destroys it, and you're just like, okay, so she was willing to kill everybody in order to kill him. Like she's already there.
I didn't
She's
know that she
already
activated it. That was actually a question that I had because when I was watching it, I was like, does he just know that
she
it
like
exists
bites
or did
down
she?
on it
Oh, okay.
because it makes a noise. It like makes a little beep,
Uh,
and then he kind of grabs her and stops her
right.
when he sees her. But because I think she was like turning it on and then like waiting for him to get close enough,
Hmm.
but he kind of gets in there too quick, and it's
Right.
it's one of those things that it's like it doesn't really work if you think about it for too long, but it doesn't matter because it's just part of the story. Like you just let it go. It's just part
Yeah.
of the story. And I think this is one of those things with Asian storytelling that I think American audiences often have a hard time with, is that one of the ways that we criticize American storytelling is if there's a plot hole, everybody rushes to be the first one to point out the plot hole. So because that tells everybody that you're the smartest person in the room and you watched the movie the best. And I don't find that that's the case with a lot of Asian storytelling. It's like
There's so many plot holes in this movie. Like I feel like you
so
pointed them
many. There's
out
so many times
that
where you're like,
like,
well, if you guys would have just done X, then Y wouldn't have happened,
but
right?
also
Like why don't you just do this or this?
how did the nanos save them when the whole purpose of the bomb was that it wipes out the nanos?
Exactly.
That, like, ultimately, I'm like, is it that they threw in the extra line about the undestructible nanos being
That's
separate
it.
from, like,
That's yeah.
her
That
nanos? Like,
the Lang gradient or whatever
yeah, something.
nanobots are
Yeah,
different from the other nanobots.
yeah.
They can't be destroyed.
But that was
But go ahead.
now that we're in spoiler territory, I can talk
Yeah.
about the one, like, the moment was, and I'm just so impressed with myself that I kept it a secret from myself by not comprehending like, I should have clued in halfway through that they were taking the bomb with them. And I just, like, don't know,
Oh, they
like,
got
did
you?
you
They
they
got
got
you?
me 100%. They got me. And I
That's
just,
awesome.
like, and it was so awesome because I fully let this huge thing go where I was like, "Oh, cool. They're just gonna let the earth die." Like, I literally was so invested in them saving this girl and
Yeah.
not really, and being like, "Oh, somebody else will save the planet. Like, something will happen and they'll save the planet separately, and they're gonna save this girl." And it, so it, like, it was a really, like, I just felt so dumb, but it also, like, was so visceral by that point that, like, it was literally the moment where he made it to a certain point and you're watching the map. Like, I lasted a really freaking long time on this,
Yeah.
that I just, like, he's really, like, defeated, and he's like, "Hey guys," and I was like, "But why are you so sad? You're gonna make it." And then I was like, "Oh my god!" And I just, like, started, like, bawling my eyes out, and I was like, "Of course!" So I was like Sullivan in that moment where I was like, "Oh, they took the bomb." And then, but then I had the, like, split second reactions where I was like, "Okay, how are they gonna get out this? It's something to do with nanobots. They'll be saved." But I also allowed myself to be like, maybe they actually will die. Like, because I'd gotten
Yeah.
so far in the narrative that, like, like, it was all these beautiful, like, tricking myself and, like, letting myself just enjoy the movie as it went, and I wasn't trying to, like, think it through. And I think that that's the thing too, where I was referencing at the beginning, like, my visceral reaction to Interstellar was because there's certain things that I just let it go and I just watch it for what it is, and I let the
Yeah.
information come to me as it's being given. And that was what was so powerful to me in that moment, is that I had let the information, I had looked at it at face value. I had been watching this as them escaping with this girl, and they were going to outrun the blast radius. And, like, that to me was what was happening throughout that whole beat. And so the switch was so visceral for me that it just, like, was brilliant, and I loved it so much, and it just made me, I, like, was, like, bawling. It was so great.
See, now it was the one point in the movie where it's like we came all this way, and I was like, I was the opposite, where I was like, well, obviously they're just gonna take the bomb,
Yeah.
and I was waiting for the reveal of, like, they're remotely piloting the ship,
Ah, okay. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
that
yeah.
he's gonna, like, rip open the cockpit
Right. And
to
then
kill
it,
Taiho, and
yeah,
it's gonna be empty, right?
right,
And it's because, like, oh, they're all they're back on in the
right,
factory control,
right,
or they're on Pierre's ship controlling it remotely or something like
right.
that. Um, and so when it became really apparent of, like, oh no, they're on the ship's about to explode, I was like, I actually got kind of mad at the movie and was like, you brought me all this way to just tell me Rogue One again?
Yeah, yeah,
Like no,
yeah.
I don't accept that. And
Right.
then it happens, it explodes, and it immediately cuts back to Cutnam, and is like, oh, oh, she
Okay.
saved them.
Yeah,
Okay, how? And then they show us, and I go, okay, yeah, those were special
yeah.
nano
Special nanobots,
bots or
they
whatever.
were undisputed. But it's, I mean, it, I will, like, it was not, I would have been upset watching it that way. I don't think I would have gotten the same thing out of it had
Yeah,
I in any way thought through the logistical stupidity of them not having taken the bomb. Right? Like that, but there was so many parts that led to that, that again, under the right viewing circumstance, you had to believe that they didn't care. It's not like anybody on Earth was established as somebody we should care about. Like,
yeah,
really, like, in the way that movies set up, like, ooh, Earth is like a thing that you have to save or these people will die. It was like a concept, right? Like the idea that this evil corporation had won, and now all they could do in this instance was, like, take this girl and like save her. And it was like all of the pieces that had led up to that were me believing that they were selfish enough to not have come up with a solution to save Earth. Like, there was just something in there where I was like, they're gonna leave the Earth saving to somebody else, and they're gonna save the girl. And
Mhm.
I don't know why. I don't know why in my brain I didn't connect those things. But again, I think it was willful ignorance at that point in the film. So
And I love the end of this movie, like the whole sequence at the end where we see them, and like they got a new ship, and it's like it's not like they now all of a sudden they're like they're in a different station in life. They're
right.
still sweepers,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they've got a brand new ship, and they all their clothes are all clean, and
And he's got
and Taiho
shoes.
has the shoes, which is
Yeah.
just like it's so good. He's just got the nicest pair of Nikes you can imagine, and and Bubs has transformed her exterior to match the interior, and you get, like you said, you get that great moment of them looking at the new voices, trying to choose them, and Cottenham's like, I like the voice that you have,
Yeah.
and it's
I love
just
it.
it it there's also, like, we haven't really talked that much about Tiger Park, but
Yeah.
he was like ran like a drug cartel basically, and was
Yeah.
like this gangster, and he had all these tattoos. And I love how she just tells the story. She's just telling the story at the end, and she's like, and Uncle Tiger got rid of all of his tattoos so that he wouldn't scare my friends at school. And it's like the characters are so transformed by this
Yeah.
encounter. um and we obviously, like at the end of act 2, when her father is killed, it's a gut shot, right? Because it's like, because
Yeah.
everybody else just gets killed
Yeah.
unceremoniously, right?
But
Like
you
the
think
rest of
that
the
they're
Grey
not going to
Wolves.
kill him, maybe, right? Like it's like maybe
Yeah,
he won't die, and then you have to watch. The beautiful part about it is that when he dies, it's what Tejo is. It's his reaction
yeah,
that is what you're watching. You're not watching the dad dying. It's how it is impacting Tejo for the reverse, right? Like he had been missing his little girl, and now he realizes that like that impact. But it still isn't enough to make him not take the money. There's like this
not
beautiful,
yet,
like there's
not
this
yet,
like
yeah.
it's not quite enough, and I do like that sort of progression as you go through. But yeah, like that was real. I didn't think that they would do it. But the good news is that the moment he died, you knew everybody else was safe. Because
Yeah,
they had
yeah.
killed all the people they were going to kill by that point in the movie, because if they had killed anybody else, it would have been really upsetting. Although I did almost think that Tiger Park was going to die in the when he's fighting the new number 1, but I liked that it was just like
That
the arm.
I that's one of those other things where it's like, if this were a TV show, that moment would have made more sense. Like
Yeah.
that whole encounter would have made more sense. But because it's a movie, all of a sudden in the third act, you introduce that, like, oh yeah, by the way, this lady is like the most badass robot space guard lady now, and you're like, she hasn't been in the rest of the movie as far as I
No, she
recall.
was. She was in the first scene. Like they got her, because what I thought was interesting is that I had also gendered the the space mechs, like the
Yeah, yeah,
police,
yeah.
and the her face, it opened and you saw her as a woman, and I was like, "Oh, interesting. It's a woman," but the voices are still male, and I was just clocking on.
Oh, okay. I
I
just
clocked
must
on
have
that.
missed that moment. I just must have
Yeah.
missed that moment. And
Well,
because it
cuz it
was
was
just, to me it was like, why is this character being introduced only to die?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
for this fight.
Yeah. No,
And but yeah, you
she had
do
been
think
in the
that he's
very
dead for a
beginning.
second.
Yeah, yeah. But that
Okay.
was something too where they could have they didn't do a lot with her, but for me, and now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm like, "Oh, cuz again, the voice was male, but it was a woman inside." I just clocked it because of that, that I was like, "Oh, this they gave a face to the people inside of it," because I also think that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
learn about those you don't learn about him being one of these space guards until after that scene. And so in that scene, it humanized it was like there's a person inside this big RoboCop, basically.
Yeah, because
And
at
yeah,
first it's not clear if they're just robots or
yeah,
if they're people, right?
yeah. But
Yeah.
no, so they did at the like when they destroyed Cottenham. I'm using my little robot
Yeah, yeah.
fingers there. Is that like you do see that there's somebody inside that suit, and it's her. So, but she's not like a big, like they don't make a big deal about it. I just clocked it because she was a woman. So
Gotcha. But yeah, it's yeah, I love the, like, the end of it, and we get that scene with where they kill um where they kill her dad, but then the end of the movie, like that's sort of a tearjerker. But then the end of the movie, when she connects Taiho to his daughter like one last time, sort of thing,
Oh yeah.
and they can say goodbye. It's like that was it's like that was the moment of like you brought me all the way through this story for this moment, and that
That's
was
fair.
worth it. That
That's
was
fair.
worth it because like I get it. I understand why everybody dies in Rogue One, but everybody dies in Rogue One because they're not in any of the other Star Wars movies. That's really why everybody dies at the end of Rogue One.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then they're like, oh no, it's actually for this deep, meaningful reason. It's like, no, it's just a contrivance that you wrote into the script. But I it's just this so I've I've kind of been trying to figure out like what is it about the new Star Wars that like some of this new Star Wars stuff hits and some of it misses, and more often than not I'm finding that's missing, especially with the movies. I mean, like if we go there have been 5 movies so far, right? Three saga films, and then Solo and Rogue One. And The Force Awakens is a good movie. It's fun. It's fine, right? It does everything that it needs to do. I think mostly because Lawrence Kasdan wrote the screenplay. So I think like that takes it a lot of the way because he wrote Empire and Jedi. So he actually knows the world. He knows the characters. He
Right.
understands how to tell a Star Wars story. So bringing him in to reintroduce everything was the right call, and it worked really well. Ryan Johnson comes. I'll go in chronological order because then
And then
Rogue
I
One
will just point
happens.
out that you are the one that said you didn't want a podcast till 11 o'clock. So I'm going to
Yeah, yeah,
stop and
yeah.
let you do your end of the podcast ramp down with a Star Wars rant. I'm so excited
Yeah,
for
this is the
this.
end of the conversation. Yeah. Rogue One happens, and Gary Whitta. So John Knoll came up with the idea. Who he's one of like the he basically runs ILM at this point. And he's been around forever. Him and his brother are the ones who created Photoshop. Like they've been in the image editing, visual effects since 1977. So, well, maybe not quite that long, but I like early days of ILM. Like, so John Knoll came up with the idea for Rogue One of like, oh, let's tell the story of the team that stole the plans for the first Death Star. Like what leads up into A New Hope. Gary Whitta was hired to write the movie, wrote the movie, and then Gareth Edwards was brought in to direct it. And then they rewrote the hell out of the movie while they were filming it. And then Disney kind of got involved and was like, this is not what we kind of asked you guys to make. We wanted a Star Wars movie, and this is like a super bummer where everybody dies at the end and your lead character is incredibly unlikable. Can we change the third act so all of a sudden she's Princess Leia? And they went, we'd really rather not do that. And then they went, yeah, but we're Disney, so we're going to tell you to do it anyways. And so then they did that. So that movie is incredibly horribly compromised and not really what the people who were making that movie were trying to make. Somehow, in the midst of all of that kerfuffle, no one was paying attention to Ryan Johnson because it was just he wrote and directed it, and there was this magical bubble around him that somehow I think it's because of his personality. I think because he's so kind of unassuming and sweet that everybody just kind of went like, well, he's going to make an unassuming and sweet Star Wars movie, and then he made the Star Wars movie that kind of like upends the whole franchise the most. But he told a story that meant something to him, and he pissed off a lot of people as a result because it is a singular visionary direction, so that's what's gonna happen. But the movie has heart. Unfortunately, it's the middle movie in a trilogy, and it doesn't really count for much because the movie before it doesn't really care, and the movie after it definitely doesn't care. Solo comes in, and that's Lawrence Kasdan and John Kasdan, his son, going like John Kasdan was like, I want to make a Star Wars movie after watching his dad make The Force Awakens. And obviously having sort of, had the experience of his dad making the other 2 Star Wars movies with George Lucas, and was like, I have an idea. Let's tell the origin of Han Solo. Let's do it together. So they wrote that as a father and son. And that's why that movie is awesome, because that was 2 people who like, they wanted to tell a Star Wars story. Um, it is a little bit conflicted because of all of the stuff that happened with the directors, but the screenplay is where it starts. And if you don't have a good screenplay, you're not going to make a good movie. And sometimes if you have a good screenplay, despite your director being Michael Bay, you can still make The Island, which is an awesome movie.
Yeah.
Because the screenplay is good and actually had a meaning, like
I
it
love The
actually had a
Island.
purpose.
So fun.
It drove towards something. And then obviously we get Truss, and Rise of Skywalker is just a complete garbage fire because you've got J.J. Abrams, who didn't want to be there, who was just doing it because they had nobody else to do it, so he came back in and did it. You've got Chris Terrio, who's a terrible writer, who didn't understand the purpose of the first two movies, didn't understand what Lawrence Kasdan was doing, definitely didn't understand what Rian Johnson was doing, and was busy counting all of his money from Batman v Superman that he shouldn't be allowed to keep because that movie is a god-awful mess. Because Martha is the thing
because Martha.
That's
yep.
what Chris Terrio writes movies like this. I know if their mothers have the same name, that's why they'll work together at the end. Okay, now that I know how it ends, I'm going to work my way towards that moment. And everything else in Batman v Superman is just to get us to that moment. And then everything after that is just punching hard, I guess. And then Superman dies. Yeah, that's a bad movie. This is a bad movie. And Rise of Skywalker is very similar. We just have to get to the moment where Rey puts two lightsabers together. Okay, well, whose lightsaber is the other lightsaber going to be? I know it should probably be Kylo Ren's lightsaber. Yeah, but we're going to have him throw that into the ocean for some reason. For some reason. Okay, so somebody else has to have another lightsaber. Cool. What if Leia had a lightsaber because she was training to be a Jedi? Yeah, that didn't come up in either of the other movies.
Right.
But I guess let's go ahead and do that so that we can have her with the X lightsabers so she can Dragon Ball Z Emperor Palpatine into oblivion, because that's how you close the loop on a character who already died in 1983 and everybody was totally satisfied with that.
Yeah.
But whatever, it's like, okay, well, if you get thrown down an elevator shaft, you can survive. But if you get X lightsaber lightning, then you're dead. Only because you just made those rules up right now. Like, you just made that up. It could have been anything. My point being that when you look at the Star Wars movies that have been made since Disney took over, it's a mixed bag at best, and it is a lot of like, we don't know what we're doing, we're just making movies to make money, which is not a thing that I like to say about Disney Lucasfilm a lot, because I do think that there are creatives within Lucasfilm that are working really hard to tell really great stories, because Dave Filoni had a story that he wanted to tell with Star Wars Rebels, and he did, and it's awesome, and that series is super good and my favorite Star Wars of all of the Star Wars. Star Wars Rebels is my favorite, and those characters are some of my favorite characters in the entire saga. And it's because it's like there's a heart to it, there's meaning to it, there's a purpose behind it, right? And The Mandalorian season 1, that's what it felt like. One of the reasons why I think season 2 is feeling a little bit weird to half of the audience is because season 2 all of a sudden became less about the story of Din Djarin and Grogu and started to become about, well, we want to spin off Boba Fett into his own story, and we want to create this New Republic series, so we're going to spin that off too. So we're going to spend a lot of time with these characters to do that, and we're going to bring back this guy and this guy and this guy. And some of that storytelling is awesome, but also detracts from the main story that we're kind of focused on, right? And the purpose of it and the meaning of it kind of starts to waver a little bit. So I think like that, the thing about the original Star Wars movies, the first 3, is that George Lucas had stuff that he was trying to do. Like, he had a story, he had something that he wanted to tell. When he went back to do the prequels, love him or hate him, doesn't matter, his heart's there, right? Like, and that's why I think they persist. I think that's why over the years people have softened to them, because the technology wasn't quite there yet. He was trying to figure it out. He was pushing like through those barriers and really focused on that stuff, and not as focused on the performances and the storytelling and getting that stuff as tight as it needed to be. That said, the story that he told of the prequels is 100% clear and is a great story if you take a step back from the way that we were told the story, right? Like if you can just sort of remove yourself from the movies and just think of it as what he was trying to tell, like the story and the reason that the story exists, beyond just getting Anakin from a little kid to Darth Vader, like this idea of the fall of the Jedi Order and, you know, the compromise of blah blah whatever, the democracy falling apart, all of this stuff that he was trying to do. He does a really good job of it, and it's actually really really well told in terms of just that story by itself. um this movie has a heart, it has a meaning, and it has a purpose to it, and like actually has multiple purposes to it. It's got that whole anti-corporation, uh, you know, giving power back to the people sort of story to it, and then it has this found family story as well. And then it's sort of like in the deepest layer, in the core of it, it's Tai Ho's story of letting go uh of the mistakes of his past in order to be a better person in the future, right? And it just, like, that's why it's good. It's
Right.
like it's built on the foundation of like, oh, we want to tell a story that does these things, that serves this purpose, that actually makes the world a better place by telling that story. And I think like people are going to compare this to Star Wars in a lot of ways, and I get the sense that people are going to miss the mark a lot with it, and not really understand why a movie like this succeeds in the moment when they put the call out to the sweepers and they all show up, and you're like, hell yes, and they
Yeah.
start ripping apart the drones, and you're like, this is awesome. It is literally the exact same moment as the end of Rise of Skywalker. Yet at the end of Rise
Right.
of Skywalker, the culmination of 40 years of storytelling and the most money that anybody's ever had to make a movie, the most resources, literally they could do anything they want, and we get a blue gray mess of a bunch of dots with lines on them kind of flying at stuff, and none of it means anything because we don't see inside any of those cockpits. We didn't have a connection to any of those characters other
Right.
than Lando and Chewie and Poe, right? Like none of this means anything, and it's all just special effects. It's all just CG, and it's only important because literally the characters are telling us how important it is, as opposed to this movie where it's like, well, we spent time at the beginning of the movie establishing that there's a rivalry between all of these characters, that here comes victory and it's
Right.
stealing the basically bounty, right,
Yeah.
from everybody else, and they all hate them. They
Yeah.
hate victory. And
Yeah.
we go through the movie and it's like everybody kind of just like spits on them because they're the best, but they don't, like, everybody's just competing, right?
Yeah.
But then the end of the movie is, hey, the corporation has been doing this to us. We
Yeah.
are actually stronger together, and everybody comes together and defeats the corporation, and it's like awesome. That's
Yeah.
it's
That's what it's
it's
supposed to be.
it's transformative, right? Like it
Mhm.
is, you come out of it going like, wow, if we all work together, maybe we could actually stop these bad things from happening.
Yeah.
And then we all go back to our lives and forget about it very, very
I,
quickly. But it's
I
nice
do
to
love
think about for a second.
it is, and I do love the shout out to the actual like Canadian ship that was in there as well. Like one of the pilots straight up had the Canadian flag on his chair. And I
Oh,
just think
nice. I didn't
that was
notice that.
rad.
Is it the guy with the like Letterman jacket, the red jacket?
I don't remember what he looked like other than being generic a white dude.
Okay.
But
Well, there
uh
there was really only like a couple of generic white dudes, and
yeah,
one of them was like Russian, one of them was Pierre, and then one of them spoke English. So I think that's probably, I think we're probably talking about the
I
same person.
felt like there was an absence of American ships. And I
I
don't know
feel
if
like I feel like the reason for that is that UTS is USA.
Oh,
The
but there's a
citizens were the
British, but there's a
Americans.
British guy that runs it, so they were careful there. Yeah,
It's, you know what? After 145 years or however old he is, it might just be an affectation. Um,
maybe.
there seemed to be other stuff going on with that character. I love that they never explain any of it. His like weird vein things,
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah. There's
scan that
so
he
many
gets.
things that you just don't that they don't explain. There's so many
It's
things in this movie that they don't
it's super
explain.
clear that like he is like genetically modified and like maybe partly a robot or something,
It's
and
unclear.
like but it's not important. The only thing that serves to do is establish like no, Sullivan is a monster.
Yeah.
He's a
Yeah.
monster. That's what you
Yeah.
need to know. That's it. He's just a monster. um he's
Now I want to
different
go
on the
back
inside.
and now I
Yeah.
want to go back and make sure that it actually was a Canadian flag. There's actually like surprisingly little on the internet when I try to Google like images of space sweepers, but it's all good.
Give it a little bit of time,
I'll try
but
to. I will, but I want to see if I'm like maybe I am hallucinated it. But I was like pretty sure that it was a Canadian flag. So, but we'll see.
cool.
All
Well,
good.
you know what? I think that's it. I think we're good. I
I
think
think
we
we
did
talked
it.
about a lot of stuff. Like we covered all I wanted to talk about for Space Sweepers. It was great. Fun times.
Yeah. I'm gonna be a total knob and only refer to it as Spaceship Victory from now on. Be like,
No, you can. I will just say, to be perfectly honest, though, it is just called Victory in Korean.
is it okay?
Yeah, because there was a I translated it because I was like, this doesn't. It's not enough. It wasn't enough syllables. Like the Korean translation of the title, even though it
Yeah.
says Spaceship Victory, I was like, that's not enough syllables to say Spaceship Victory. So I wanted to investigate
Interesting.
what it actually was, and it's just Victory. So.
Because AsianWiki.com it says that it's Spaceship Victory, which I don't know. I don't know where they're getting that from, but
Well, I just if you look on the Space Sweepers, like on the Wikipedia,
yeah.
it says in Korean it has a Hangul like words for it, and then it says Sungriho and then lit Spaceship Victory. So it says Spaceship Victory is the last one as like a translation, but Sungriho, if that's how you say it, is what the Hangul is, and that is just victory. So it's, I don't know. That's just semantics that nobody cares about, but it's
yeah, no. It's yeah, it's all. I mean, I
no,
don't
it's all
know.
good.
I don't
But
know
call
enough
it.
about. I don't
But
know
I
enough
know.
about
But
Korean to.
I want to say that I love so much your impulse to call it by the Korean name, because
Yeah.
that just speaks to me on a level where I'm like, there's a lot of stuff in translations that like make or break something, and so
Yeah.
I'm yeah, I support that. So
I'm
feel free to just
attempting
call it Spaceship Victory.
to put it into Google Translate and see what it says.
Cool.
So I think this is the thing is that maybe it's a bit of both things, because it doesn't appear to be able to translate it. It just gives a romanization. It doesn't give like an actual word.
Really?
Yeah, which says to me that if Korean is similar to kanji, there might be like a unique character in here. Like maybe there's something that's like maybe part of that actually says spaceship in some way.
Sungriho. No. Sungriho. Interesting. All right. But cool. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, because
It just romanizes it for you. It doesn't actually tell you.
yeah, when I copy and paste the hanja, which what's the difference between hangul and hanja? Do you know?
I've never heard Hanja before.
Okay. This
So
says Wikipedia says Hanja is the Korean name for a traditional writing system consisting mainly of traditional Chinese characters that was
okay, yeah,
incorporated and used since the
that
yeah.
yeah, that makes sense that it's different characters. Hangul is the translation is like the Korean characters. So
Okay.
Hanja, because they incorporate, they would have originally.
So
used
the
different
Hanja translates on Google Translate into victory,
Interesting.
but
Yeah.
the Hangul just translated into the
Just romanizes
romanization.
it. Yeah.
So
Interesting.
that's somebody who knows more about Korean could maybe
let us know
let us
as
know.
we fumble through it on our
But I'm gonna like I said, I'm just gonna call it Spaceship Victory because that's a way cooler name, and
Yeah.
also it just I probably won't. I will probably call it Space Sweepers because otherwise I'll have to
Otherwise people
explain
won't know what
myself
you're
every
talking about,
time.
but yeah.
But whenever it comes up in a discussion, I'm like, or as it's known in the original Korean, Spaceship Victory. Just to be that guy every once in a while.
Yeah,
It's
please do.
when you're that guy and you don't know that you're that guy, it's not okay. But if you're intentionally being that guy because you think that it's funny to be that guy,
Then you're allowed to lean into it. Yeah.
yeah. As long as you're in on the joke, and when somebody calls you out for being that guy, you're like, yeah, I am. Then it's okay. It's acceptable. These are the rules that I have established for myself, much like the rules that they established at the end of Rise of Skywalker, that really don't make any sense and only exist within the contrivance of the reason for the rule existing in the first place, which is that you decided to bring back Palpatine for no reason. For no reason. Well, this brings the whole story full circle. Does it?
No.
Does it?
Nope.
I don't think it does. Cool. It's been over a year, and Rise of Skywalker still makes me mad. It's a bad movie.
It's fair.
Cool. Well, that's it. That's the episode. We'll be back next week. I don't know what we're going to talk about next week,
I don't know.
but
People can
we're
send
not going to talk
suggestions.
about WandaVision yet, because we're gonna, when WandaVision is done, we will do an episode of it'll still be on the Thunderquack feed. You won't have to subscribe to a new feed or anything, but it'll be our Marvel MCU podcast
Right.
with myself, Amanda, and Curtis, and we're gonna talk about the whole
Right.
thing.
That
As
thing
much
I
as I
agreed to
love
do.
all of the shows that are doing like weekly breakdowns on WandaVision, which are really cool because they're talking about all of the, like, here's all the Easter eggs, here's what all this stuff could mean. Every episode that airs, I am more and more thankful that we're waiting until the end to talk about this show.
Oh yeah.
Because the story, like what this show was when we got the first two episodes versus what it was after the third, fourth, fifth episode, like the meaning of this show changes every week as we get more and more of the information. So by the time that we're done, we will have a holistic view of it, and I think we'll be able to talk about it in a really cool way. That'll be a compliment to some of the other podcasts out there doing a weekly breakdown. The other thing is that it also just means I get to enjoy it on a weekly basis, and I don't have to worry about being critical about it until later, which we were asked recently if we're gonna, if we had said a million years ago that if they ever decided to do a Superman standalone like series
that we would
on the
podcast
CW,
about
that
it.
we would stop talking about Arrow and start talking about that. But unfortunately, they weren't quick enough, and we finished. We're done with the CW. But the thing is that, and this is the way that I responded on Twitter, was I want to enjoy Superman and Lois. And I think the only reason I'm able to enjoy Legends of Tomorrow as much as I am, because it is a very, very awful show at times, is that, like, I don't have to care. It doesn't matter. I'm not impressing anybody by criticizing it. Whereas when you do a weekly breakdown show, it feels like you have to, we talked about this all the time, you have to be critical. Otherwise, what are you going to talk about for an hour?
Yeah.
Right? Like, if all you're going to do is blow smoke up its butt, then you're just an hour-long free commercial advertising for a show that doesn't care that you exist. So what is the point of that? There is no point to that. Being critical is an important part of it when that calls for. Critical doesn't necessarily mean being negative, right?
Right.
But it means that when a show is less than stellar, which Arrow was for a lot of its run, it becomes a very unfun thing to do on a weekly basis. I don't want to get there with Superman and Lois. I want to watch that show and just enjoy a show that has Superman on it. I don't want to turn a thing that I love into work. I think that's the easier way to say it. But and I think that Amanda is happy to go along with that, right?
Yeah.
If I can speak for you for a second.
I'm
like,
good. You can. Yeah, you can.
And don't worry, there will be plenty of other people. All sorts of podcasts will crop up. They'll cover the first 3 episodes of Superman and Lois, and then the next one will come out like a week late, and maybe they'll do 2 episodes at once, and then the next one will, sorry guys, we're going to be a week late again, and then that next episode will just never come. It just won't ever come. So look forward to all of that. Whatever DC TV podcast has in the hopper, that show will do what we would have done exactly as well as we would have done it, if not better. So us existing in that context is irrelevant. We exist in this context where we just talk about whatever we want, and we can just be happy that Space Sweepers exists.
Of course,
and
we can. And I just, because I can't get it out of my head, and just before we actually finish, there's something to it. Victory is part of the word, but I can't figure out the third syllable for what it's translating. I think it's just it's doing something to the word victory. It's why it's not translating properly, is that it's making victory have an implication of being a ship of some kind, but I can't figure out the direct translation. I really want somebody who speaks Korean to tell me what the direct translation is.
We'll sort this out at some point. But good. Yeah, I think that it is. Yeah, there's something unique in there that's making it Spaceship Victory. But yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Stay safe, everybody. Wash your hands and be kind to one another. Because remember, COVID is still a thing, and you should still wash your hands.
Follow the Thunderquack Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by searching the Thunderquack Podcast. You can support us in 3 ways. First, by heading to the podcast service of your choice and leaving a rating and review. Second, by going to store.thunderquack.com to pick up some merch from your favorite podcasts. And last but not least, by heading to patreon.com/thunderquack to kick in with your monthly pledge of support and get cool rewards like early access, ad-free episodes, and extended episodes. The Thunderquack Podcast is the official podcast of thunderquack.com. Head to thunderquack.com to discover more great podcasts.